All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to session 3 of Brainstorm, How to Have a Sound Mind. And just for clarity's sake, for all of us to review, the key verse for this sort of masterclass is 2 Timothy 1, verse 7. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of, everybody say it with me, sound mind. And for session 1, we talked about the brainstorm of worry. And for every session, what we're doing is we're giving you also a storm stopper, a statement for you to preach to yourself to remind you that Ryan's a good preacher, but he's not the most important preacher in your life. Nobody talks to you more than you talk to you. Nobody listens to you more than you listen to you. So what are you saying to you? So this is something to preach yourself into it when you don't feel it. And for the first session of worry, this was the storm stopper. I don't need to overthink. I just need to stop and think.
So we were working out on Thursday afternoon, the day after we preached this, and something came up for me, a situation came up for me with a project I've been working on that was stressing me out. And Doug watched my mind start to become like a storm in my brain. And he goes, "Hey, Ryan, you just preached it. You don't need to overthink. Just stop and think." And I realized, oh yeah, like there's some things that I can control here. There's one phone call I have to make here. I need to pray about this. I need to write a few things out. And then I need to let it go for the weekend. So I don't know if you've had any of those experiences in the last week, but it really does work.
Yeah, we're smoking what we're selling is what Ryan's trying to say, okay? Oh, everyone needs a pastor, even Ryan, and I'm his. And then storm. For session 2, the second brainstorm was information overload. And the idea of praying to God for peace and then God sort of saying to you, hey, I don't have anywhere to put it because your mind is overloaded with information. You absorb information at the cost of your very precious and limited attention. And right now you have so much information, I don't got anywhere to put peace. And so here was the storm stopper. I'm not God, and I don't need to know everything. Now, for the third session, this is the brainstorm, indecision. Indecision. And the title of this session is How to Make a Decision.
Can anyone relate with that? Anybody, let's ask it this way. Is anybody really good at making decisions? Is anybody really bad at making decisions? Can anybody not decide if they are good or bad at, see, I've got some news for you. I hate to tell you. It's hard, right? And here's the deal. The average human being has to make 35,000 decisions every single day. That you have to make 35,000 decisions tomorrow, Doug.
That's a correct
crazy
number, you sure?
I'm pretty sure.
Wow. No, I think it is. We researched that a few different places, 35,000 decisions.
And like some of those decisions are small, like what should I have for breakfast, what should I wear, things like that. But then all the way up to things like, hey, should I sell this business or should I take that job? Should I relocate? All of the different decisions that come up throughout the course of your day, it really adds up. And what all the research is showing is that we are getting worse and worse at making decisions. So we're trending in the wrong direction. We're becoming more indecisive. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Let me give you 2, because I think it might help start our discussion today. The first is that we just have way too many options. You remember when life was simple? Like there used to be a day where we didn't have the entire world in our pocket. And what's ironic is all of these technological advances that we're making are made to make our lives easier, and yet it's just actually overcomplicating everything. It's getting to the point where we have, okay, this afternoon, I sat down to internalize all this content for today, and then an ad popped up for a new app that takes books and gives them to you in 15 minutes. And the algorithm just knew exactly who he was talking to, or it was talking to. Like, that's just like, I can't help it. There's a 5-day free trial, and I was like, I should probably do it. And so 30 minutes later, I'm halfway through this psychology book that has nothing to do with any of this content, and I stop, and I'm like, what am I doing right now? You know? But we just have so much stuff coming at us. We have so many different options that we can take. Think about a date night. Okay, you finally have some time with your spouse to just get away and have a date night. You have a sitter for the kids, and this is supposed to be time for you to relax. But then what's the problem? You have to pick a restaurant to go to. And in a city like Austin, you have 1,000 options. And each one of them has like 100 different reviews on Yelp for you to read through. And then you get to the restaurant, and you realize that you chose Cheesecake Factory, so you have a 30-page menu that you have to like sift through. And you're like, I don't even know what kind of food I'm in the mood for, and this all looks so good. And then you get home, and you just want to watch some TV and unwind, but you first can't even pick what streaming channel you want. Like, is it Netflix? Is it Hulu? Is it Peacock? Is it Apple TV? What do we do? And you finally pick Netflix. Then you realize you have like 30,000 options to pick on Netflix, and you spend 30 minutes scrolling through. My point is we have way too many options.
That's why I love watching TV and movies on United Airlines. I did this just a few days ago because I have a definition for options, and it's opportunities for anxiety. That's what options are, just opportunities for anxiety. And if you watch all the available movies or TV shows on United's app, it's like 1/1000th of Netflix, And I was even watching Friends 2 nights ago on my flight back from Denver, and they had just 4 Friends episodes. The one with the jellyfish, the one with Ross's sandwich, the one where Chandler was in the box, and the one with all the Thanksgivings. And I watched all of them, probably not even my favorite episodes, but I enjoyed them so much because I wasn't FOMOing about the other Friends episodes because I didn't even have them. And so what are options? Opportunities for anxiety.
Yeah, we call this the paradox of choice. And by we, I don't mean Doug and I. We didn't come up with that. I mean, we all call this the paradox of choice, that you would think the more choices you have, the easier it would be. But it's actually the opposite. The paradox of choice is that an abundance of options actually requires more effort to choose and can leave us feeling unsatisfied with our choices. There's a pastor named Craig Groeschel, who we both look up to, and he talks about how this leads to decision fatigue. And so he has to make, if the average human makes 35,000 decisions every day, he's probably making double that. And so he looks for ways to eliminate decisions in his life. So like he realized he doesn't want to choose where to go to lunch or what to eat for lunch every single day. And so what he did is he gave his assistant 5 options. He said, here are my 5 favorite things for lunch. Every day, I just want you to surprise me with one of these. You pick. That way, he's just in his office making decisions, and lunch shows up, and it's always one of his favorite things, right? But he didn't have to spend any time deciding that day because decision fatigue is a real thing. There's this fascinating study where this small panel had to decide. They had 11,000 prisoners that they had to interview and decide which ones got parole. And so they made these decisions, and they decided to let about 33% of them, about a third of them, go on parole. But then when they looked back and looked at the data, they realized something really interesting. They realized that when one of the cases, for the cases that happened first thing in the morning, like at 8:30, 70% of the time they said yes. When a case took place at the end of the day, like 5 p.m., after a long day of making decisions, they only said yes 10% of the time. So think about that for a second. What's going on? At some point in the day, you just get tired of having so many decisions to make, so many options to choose from. We just have a paradox of choice here. We have so many decisions that we have to make that it gets harder and harder for us to make decisions. That's the first problem. The second problem is
so schedule your interviews for the morning.
Totally.
Yeah.
Big decisions, right? Like there is a point in the day where it's just no longer a good idea to make decisions. Put really simply. Okay, the second problem, and I'll go really fast through this one, is that we now live in a day and age where everyone is projecting perfection. This is social media, right? We're seeing everybody else's highlight reels. And so we get really insecure about the decisions we have to make because we feel like we have to make the perfect decision or else we're going to be missing out. Does that make sense? And so you can't decide if you should marry the person that you're with, even though you love them and you're so compatible and it's just such a dream team and it really makes sense on paper, but you met on a dating app and you hear all these other stories about these like notebook fairy tale endings, and you go, well, what if we don't have that though? And what if it's not perfect? And then you just get paralyzed by the decision day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. We live in a day and age where everyone is projecting perfection, and none of it's real, by the way. We're just projecting our highlight reels. And so we get caught up thinking and overthinking and overthinking. It's no wonder, Doug, it's so hard for us to make decisions. It's no wonder we are, as James says, double-minded.
Double-minded, yeah. Two of the biggest decisions I've ever made. Number one was whether or not to marry Sam. And she's my wife, so I did. So that's how the story ends. And the other one was where to start this church. So we were living in Denver, and I'll rewind back to 2017, the spring of 2017, trying to decide San Diego or Austin. And we chose Austin, so that's how the story for that one ends also. However, I will take you back a little bit through a few of those things when we break this down in a more practical way. But two texts from Scripture that somebody gave me that were so helpful when it comes to decision making. One was Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Remember, in I think session 1, we talked about the difference between memorization and internalization. Both very important. But when memory verses, you commit them to memory, when those become part of your DNA and part of you, that's when you've internalized them, which is why it's so important to speak these verses over and over and over until they become a part of who you are. So I recommend that with both of these texts. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight, which is at the end of the day, that's what we want. Make my path straight, God. And then the other one is James chapter 1, verses 5-8. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. The one who doubts, and this is part of where we got the imagery, by the way, for this course. The one who doubts is like a wave of the sea blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do.
All right, so what do we do? How can we stop being so double-minded? How do you really make a decision? And the answer is you just flip a coin. Every single time you flip a coin.
So get a coin.
Yep, it's super easy, heads or tails. I'm kidding. But it is super helpful to have a formula. Right, a formula for how to make a decision. So here's where we're going, and this is where you really need to pay attention. We want to give you a 3-step formula for how you can make any decision that you are trying to make right now, and here it is. Scout the decision. Hold on, that was so anticlimactic. I missed the click. Scout the decision, make the decision, own the decision. Scout the decision, make the decision, own the decision. Let's start from the top. What do we mean by scout the decision? Well, so often I meet with someone, I'll have a pastoral meeting with someone who's trying to make a decision, and they haven't even gathered all the information. So they're trying to figure out if they should take a new job. And I'll say, well, what's the new salary compared to the old one? And they'll go, I don't know. I'll say, you don't know? Like this is a really important move. You haven't asked. They go, yeah, maybe I should probably ask, I think. Yeah, you should ask. And like you are trying to make one of the biggest decisions that you've ever made, and like you haven't figured out the most important part of it yet. Or like, hey, I have this opportunity, but I'll have to move to this new city. I don't know if I should go or not. And I'll go, do you like the new city? And they'll go, I don't know. It's like, you've never been? Like, maybe you should spend a weekend there before you think about committing your entire life to that new city, right? Like, walk around a little bit, eat at a few restaurants. And if you go, well, I don't have the budget for that, get on Google and do some research. Google what the weather is like in August in this new city. Like, take a look at what people are saying about all the restaurants. You can find out a whole lot about a city just by doing some research online, but you gotta scout. It would be like if you're trying to do a puzzle, and it's a 200-piece puzzle. I think I'm gonna try to reference a puzzle every single week. That's my goal here. It's a 200-piece puzzle, and you only have 100 of the pieces, and you just go, yeah, all right, it's good enough. We'll figure it out. It's like, no, you won't. You're not going to be able to figure out the puzzle until you get all of the pieces on the table and you turn them all right side up. You got to scout the decision before you can ever make it.
Scout the decision. Another word I give people a lot, even in lobby conversations or if it's a pastoral meeting, and you're asking the question, what does God have for me next? What job am I supposed to take? Do I go left here? Do I go right here? The word investigate, which basically is just synonymous with scout. Investigate the decision, scout the decision. God can't steer a parked car. And so oftentimes it's like we're sitting in a parked car that is our life, waiting for God to steer it. If you ever sat in a parked car and tried to steer it before the power steering's on, it's really difficult. But even if you give it just a tiny bit of gas, all of a sudden it's so much easier to steer. And so what job should I take? Well, are you applying? Are you interviewing? Are you networking? Are you having that lunch and having that coffee? Are you putting the feelers out? Are you investigating? Are you going on dates? Are you giving it just a little bit of gas to let God steer? Jesus said, if you knock, eventually the door will be open to you. The one who seeks is the one who will find. When we were even back and forth between San Diego and Austin, we went and spent a whole week in San Diego, and we came to Austin and spent a whole week here in Austin, and we called them like scouting trips, because that's what we saw, some scouting trips in the Old Testament. And even then we were like, what is a scouting trip? I don't know, until we got to Austin.
The first question we landed, and Doug goes, hey, so a scouting trip, how do you do it?
I literally said that. How do you do it? But we just went to restaurants and we had conversations with people. We walked around neighborhoods. We prayed. We visited with a few pastors from other churches and just got creative. And we were like, God, we're going to give this thing a little bit of gas and pray that in some way, shape, or form, you speak to us. And so are you scouting? Are you investigating? Are you knocking? Are you praying? Once again, if you go back to James 1, verse 5, here it is. You need wisdom? You should just ask God, who would love to generously give you wisdom, generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you.
And that's really the word wisdom, right? That's what we're after. Too often we try to simplify big decisions to, well, is it this or is it that? Well, this is the whole thing we were trying to do with our pendulum series. We were trying to show in a culture that tries to dilute things down to two options, really what the scripture invites us into is being wise. And so Andy Stanley says that one of the best questions you could ever learn to ask is this. In light of my past experience, get this, and my future hopes and dreams, what's the wise thing to do? Okay, so this is going to help some of you tremendously. When it comes to scouting the decision, there's some questions to ask about external things, like what's the weather like and what are the restaurants like. There's also a lot of inner work that you need to scout. And the best way to do this is to bring it down to past, present, and future. It's like this. The first question you ask yourself, well, what have I been prone to in the past? Did you know that your past is rich with data? Like if you can learn to remember how you reacted in certain situations, like it's like a gold mine of information to help you make the current decision that you're in. Like Deuteronomy 6:12 says, be careful not to forget the Lord who rescued you from slavery in the land of Egypt. It's so easy to do, isn't it? God was faithful back then, and then it's just so easy to forget all about that and move right back into slavery. Like I'll give you a really practical example. If the decision you're trying to decide on is should I have a glass of wine tonight? Super practical, super easy, okay? The Bible says, is very clear that drunkenness is a sin. But then like Jesus and his disciples would drink wine. So there's some gray area here. And it causes you to ask a question like, well, would it be a wise decision for me to have a glass of wine tonight? And I'll make it super simple. If you're under the age of 21, the answer is no. Just obey the rules of your land. Life is simpler, more simple that way. Okay, but now if you are 21 or over and you're asking that question, here's the first place you go. Well, what have I been prone to in the past? Like, is this something that I can handle? I have a lot of friends who have decided that they can, with wisdom, have a glass of wine. I have other friends who I respect tremendously, who have decided that because of what they're prone to in the past, it's wise for them to completely stay away from it altogether. Do you see how this works? It's not that there's a one-size-fits-all for all of these things, but we can learn to make wise decisions. And the second is this: what's my motivation at this moment? I love the Bible's invitation to examine our ways, test them. Let us return to the Lord. Use that same example. Here's two different scenarios. Scenario number one: it's a Sunday evening, and I'm having Doug and Ethan and Sam and Steph over to my house to unwind after a big week of ministry and celebrate, and I'm cooking steak, and we're having a glass of wine. That's scenario number one. Scenario number two is this: I have a really hard day, and I'm feeling super stressed out, and I'm by myself, and there's a part of me that just wants to numb and ignore how I'm feeling. Do you see how those are two very different situations? And so when it comes to making decisions, one of the questions you want to get really good at asking is, hey, what's my motivation at this moment? And then, and this one's so important, you look forward. What am I looking forward to in the future? Proverbs 29:18. Hey, this is the reason why we are so bad at making decisions. Where there is no vision, the people perish. One of the reasons we struggle so much is because we don't know who we want to be. We don't have a vision of the future me. Like when I lose sight of who I want to be 5 years from now, it starts to get really hard for me to make wise decisions right now. But when I know how, where I want to be financially, and then I'm asking the question, should I buy that jacket or not? All of a sudden I have a formula to know, well, in 5 years I want to be financially free in this way, and so I have a budget set up to help me take a step towards that direction. And so if the jacket fits within that budget, then buy it, and almost always the answer is no, right? But I have a structure set up in place to help eliminate all the decision fatigue while I'm walking through Zara. You know what I mean? Was that practical enough? Okay, so asking those three questions: what am I prone to in the past? What's my motivation in the moment? And then what am I looking forward to in the future will help you tremendously. I love James Clear, author of Atomic Habits. He says this about the future: every action you take is a vote for the person you wish to become. That's it. That's how we decide and how we can make decisions. Am I moving towards who I want to become or away?
That was really good. That was one of the most practical things I've ever seen you do, and you're a practical guy. So that's really good.
Thank you.
I love that quote, and I love talking about vision and the future you. Another good question to ask, and this won't even be on the screen, but will the future me say thank you for this? Or will the future me not? Yeah, will the future me thank me if I do this? It's a great question to ask. But let's go to, I think it's Proverbs 12, verse 15, and talk about wise counsel for a second. The way of a fool is right in his own eyes. I love that, because the Bible's not trying to sell you on anything ever. That's just helpful. The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man is he who listens to counsel. There's another proverb that says there's wisdom in a multitude of counselors, because all of us have blind spots. And so now, really quick, I do think you can swing the pendulum to all of a sudden I have too many voices, and I'm just going from counselor to counselor to counselor until I find the one who tells me what I want to hear. Or I just keep listening to podcast after podcast and sermon after sermon and asking person after person because I'm trying to delay making a decision or taking action. And so I'm just giving me more content. And then we're back to session 2, information overload. But there is wisdom in a multitude of counselors. This is, I think, especially very true in the dating world, that you have godly community around you. I remember this guy and Ethan, my dad, and Bill, my pastor at the time, 4 men who were gonna tell me not just what I wanna hear, but what I need to hear, who gave me like a green light and said, dude, yeah, you're not don't overthink this. There's something special that's happening here, because when you have chemistry with somebody, infatuation can feel a lot like hearing the voice of God sometimes. And it might be the Holy Spirit. And it might be hormones. And you're emotional, and that's fine because you got chemistry. Your friends who are watching you don't have emotions, so they can see the character and the direction and give you an honest answer. And that's also, by the way, like if you're a friend, I've said this before, but the Bible speaks of like false teaching. And I think we hear that phrase and go, ooh, that's talking about like the prosperity preachers and the wolves in sheep's clothing purposefully leading you astray. And you know what? Yeah, probably. But also, I think in our day and age, one of the greatest sources of false teaching is just well-meaning Christian friends who are too afraid to tell you what you need to hear, so we tell you what you want to hear. And so be a friend. Be a friend that will say what needs to be said. There's wisdom in multitude of counselors.
It reminds me of another Andy Stanley quote. I love this one. One of the primary reasons we don't seek counsel from the wise people around us is that we already know what we are going to hear, and we just don't want to hear it. Stanley's coming in hot today. It's not me. Don't get mad at me. Get mad at Andy. But this is all part of the scouting process. This is all part of gathering the information. It's so important that we learn to turn all the puzzle pieces over on the table. Now, there is also a trap we fall into, and Doug alluded to it, where we just spend all of our time scouting because we're afraid to actually make a decision. And so we just overthink and overthink and overthink. And so that leads us to number 2. Doug, help us, teach us, how do we make the decision?
Okay, Ryan, I will. I'll do my best. All right, well, the best I got is to go back to 2017 and trying to decide San Diego or Austin. And if you don't know the backstory of this, we had always, ever since 2011, we got the calling from God to one day start a church. And it wasn't the timing yet. And really quick, there's a difference between the calling of God and the timing of God. That might be helpful for somebody, but we got the calling in 2011 one evening while we were driving around downtown San Diego. And we're all just beach guys, and so we always assumed one day we're moving to Southern California to start a church. And then 2017 came around, and it was now the timing was lining up with the calling. But now it was time to really choose a location and get serious about doing this. And Austin kept coming up in conversations, like over and over. And then we investigated, we did our research and looked at all the reports online, and none of us had ever even been to Texas. And so, like I already said, we went to San Diego for a week, we came here for a week. I remember sitting in Sean Johnson's office. He is the senior pastor of all of Red Rocks. He's my boss, one of my great friends and my pastor. And I said, 20 years ago, you moved everything to Denver to start a church. How did you know to do that? Because I can't decide. And I love his answer because he gave me this metaphor of taking his 7-year-old son who loves Legos to the store down the Lego aisle to buy a new Lego set. And I'm experiencing this now with my 4-year-old who loves Legos. And I remember this as being a kid who would walk down that aisle at Toys R Us, RIP, and seeing 1,000 different Lego sets, and it's the paradox of choice. How am I gonna pick? And he told me the story of like kneeling down next to his son Ashton and saying, "Hey buddy, if you pick that, would it be cool?" And Ashton said, "Oh Dad, it'd be so cool." "Okay, well what about that one?" "Oh Dad, that would be awesome." "Okay, what about this?" Same answer. And then Sean just said, "All right buddy, make a decision. Just make a decision. Don't be afraid. Just make." And so then Sean looked at me and said, "Do people need Jesus in San Diego?" "Yes." "Do people need Jesus in Austin?" "Yes." Make a decision. Make a decision. Just make a decision. And I think, first of all, a lot of us are terrified of making decisions because we know verses, amazing verses like Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you. By the way, this is God saying, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope in the future. We sing those amazing worship songs like, if I know my Father, then I know my Father has good plans for me. And that is so true. And you're terrified of screwing them up. Like God is leaving a trail of breadcrumbs, and you had better find it and choose right, or else you're gonna ruin everything for your life. And he's just not that cruel. And life just isn't breadcrumbs. Neither is this God. And there are times, I really do believe, where God makes it clear, I want you to go left here, not right. I want you to go right here, not left. He's not a God of confusion, all right? But I think there's a lot of times where God sits down at essentially a table with you, with a journal and a pen, and says, I would love for us to design this next chapter of your life together. Now, I've given you free will for a reason. I've given you a God instinct for a reason. There's another scripture that says the sheep know the sound of the shepherd's voice. Tim Keller has this amazing quote where he says, God's plan works through our choices, through our choices, through our choices. In other words, you're not gonna mess up God's plan for your life. You are not that powerful, and you're not better at messing up plans than his sovereignty is strong. God's plan will work through your choices, not around or in spite of them. He's really good at getting you where he wants you to go. Let's say this is the end game for God. Your path might look like this. God is really good at, he just can't steer a parked car. Make a decision. Make a decision. I remember we have a Lakewood campus. We have 4 Red Rocks campuses in Denver. One of them's Lakewood. And I used to run our young adult ministry out of that campus. And one night, I went there by myself at like 10 p.m., and I was sitting on the floor in the auditorium, no worship on, all the lights were off, just staring up at the rafters.
Like you do.
Like you do. Call it a mental breakdown, if you will. Just saying, God, I was fasting. By the way, if you have a big decision to make and you need to shut out other voices, fasting just awakens your spirit.
Yeah.
And there's a way about it that just helps you to hear the voice of God a little bit more. And I was doing all the things you're supposed to be doing. And I remember the following Thursday night after young adults, and I would be the last one to leave every Thursday night. And I would go out the back door and set the alarm. And it was like 10:30 p.m. and I was just exhausted from trying to make this decision, thinking, God, this is gonna affect so many lives. People are quitting jobs and uprooting and selling homes to move to be part of this. You gotta give me more than just pick one, you know? And I remember getting into my car just like mad at God because I was getting crickets. And I pull out of the parking lot and I pull onto Harlan Street, and immediately, and this, not the audible voice of God, and this stuff doesn't really happen to me, but I just felt in my gut like the front doors are unlocked, you need to go back. And we have an amazing security team that always locks the front doors. That's not my job. And so I was just like, God, I'm losing my mind right now. I'm going home to go to bed. 10 seconds later, the front doors are locked. You need to go back. And I was just like mad at that point that I like swerved a U-turn and just screamed my Chevy Cruze, 4 cylinders, back into the parking lot and like screeched for a stop up on the sidewalk in front of the church, you know? And I got out of my car and I remember like storming up to the front door and saying out loud to God, like, see God, they're fine. And then the door just opened. It was completely unlocked. And like nobody was gonna break in that night. It wasn't a hero thing. It was for me. It was just so for me because I remember the alarm starts to, and so I sprint to the back and get the alarm turned back off and lock the doors and reset the alarm, get in my car, and I cried the entire way home. Because it had nothing to do with doors. And it was God essentially saying, buddy, you know my voice. The sheep know the sound of the shepherd's voice, and I sound the same in the big stuff as I do in this kind of little stuff. Now trust your God instinct, and I'm going with you. And I think I knew deep down, Austin, it's Austin. And it's kind of like when you know how to swim, it's the same thing. If you can swim in the shallow end, you can swim in the deep end. The stakes are higher, and it feels more dangerous. But you know the sound of God's voice in the small things, and the stakes are higher, but his voice sounds the same in the big stuff. Get close. Scout the decision. Fast, pray, get counsel, wrestle, and then trust your God instinct and make a decision. Here's one more pendulum for you. We don't have the actual one in the ceiling, but okay, by the way, any Mighty Ducks fans?
Come on.
So in D3, the Mighty Ducks, Gordon Bombay is no longer the coach, and they turn it over to Coach Orion, and he's gonna teach them how to play varsity hockey. Because for some reason they go from Team USA to now they're JV of a high school.
That's a jump.
And he says, when you have the puck, he says, not too careless, and that one's obvious, but then he says, but not too careful. And then he says, you cannot be afraid to lose. And I'd say the same thing when making a decision. Not too careless, that one's obvious, but not too careful. You cannot be afraid to choose. You cannot be afraid to make a decision. You cannot be afraid to choose wrong. So get close to God and make a decision.
That's so good, man.
Mm-hmm.
That just feels really important for anyone watching this at any point who needs to make a decision, man. Trust that God instinct. You know the voice. Trust it. And now here we go. You scout the decision. You make the decision. And this is the key. This step 3 is what we are so bad at. At some point, once you make the decision, now the goal is to own the decision. And so to go back to our James 1 verse, James goes, hey, here's your problem. You keep doubting. So you're like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. And he says, that person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. See, I think we have a problem making decisions, of course. But I think almost the greater enemy is all of the second guessing that we do for the next few days and the next few weeks, and for some of us for the next few years. Oh, should I have done that back in 2012? It's like, hey, keep moving. Keep God's working through your decisions. Stop being so double-minded in everything that you do. I'll say it this way. Double-mindedness is subconscious torture.
Yeah, it's like gnawing at your soul in a quiet way because you're constantly like, did I pick wrong? Did I pick wrong? Did I pick wrong? I don't wish that on anybody. Double-mindedness is subconscious torture. I do pastoral meetings all the time, and just for like 2 minutes want to almost this to feel like that, because this has happened probably 30 times where I'll be meeting with somebody who is recently married, and let's just make up a hypothetical situation. Recently married, 10 months in, and marriage is really tough. I'll say this. You guys, like, marriage is amazing. Marriage is just tough, right? It's two imperfect people being in the same home as each other. It's just hard. But this is 10 times harder for you because you're double-minded about it. It's just hard because it's hard. But you're 10xing it because you've got subconscious torture, wondering every night when you lay your head on the pillow, did I pick the wrong spouse? And that's just hell. in your brain. And so I don't know if anybody needs to hear this to be set free from something. I married my wife about 9 years ago, not because I believe I found the one woman on this planet that I'm compatible with that I could have ended up with. And if she were here, she'd be amening that from the back corner. I think the news is better than that. I chose her, and she chose me. And every day we own that decision. Because if you think, man, did I ruin God's plan for my life? Or was there one person and I didn't find that person? Then your marriage is not just tough because it's tough. Double-mindedness is torture. Own the decision. Own the decision. Do not be like that boat at sea without an anchor, just blown and tossed about by the wind, unstable in all you do. That's the spirit of the double-minded. And I really believe you have to consciously decide against that. It's the same thing Sean told us. He said, okay, make a decision, but then get there and own it. And expect it to be hard. It's hard planting a church. Oh, that's not because you chose the wrong city. It wouldn't have been easier in San Diego. You finally chose a building to set up and tear down, and it was exhausting and hard. It wouldn't have been easier down the street. Expect it to be challenging, but own the decision. You can go through a challenging season of marriage and have a sound mind at the same time. But you cannot be double-minded about it and have a sound mind at the same time. That's subconscious torture. Yeah. Own the decision.
It's like the line just came to me that the solution to being double-minded is to double down. So whenever you're starting to feel double-minded, you double down on the decision that you already made. And you said, no, that decision's made. We can't change that. Now let's double down on making the best of the decision that we made. So that's the formula. Scout the decision, make the decision, and then own the decision. Now, what we want to do, and this will be very quick, is we want to zoom out a little bit. Everyone take a deep breath. Great job. Way to stick with us. I know decisions are not easy to make. We want to give you 3 just very, very practical, like this is going to help you tomorrow type of things for your decisions. The first one is this. Create your own deadline. This one's big because we grew up in school where the teacher would say, the paper is due on Friday. And if you don't turn it in on Friday, you can't play hockey with your friends after school because you have to go to detention, for example, right? The problem is once we graduate and we're out on our own, nobody's making deadlines for us. Like sometimes in work, for sure, but for a lot of the decisions we have to make, there's no deadline, which is why some of us are on year 3 of the same decision. Okay, so the solution to it is to create your own deadline. Say it like this, decide when you're going to decide. On Thursday, before I shut my computer, I'm going to have this decision made, and I'm not going to go home until I have the decision made. And so I'm going to create my own deadline, I'm going to make the decision, and then I'm going to own it for the entire weekend. Does that make sense? Create your own decision. I'll say it this way, procrastination is the enemy of efficiency. And when you just have a whole bunch of decisions that you have to make, it takes up so much room in your brain that you're not going to be efficient. You're just going to keep putting off the decision, putting off the decision, putting off the decision. The second one is this. Hire yourself as an advisor. So often decisions are hard to make because we're too emotionally attached to the decision. And so one of the exercises we like to do when we're trying to make a big decision for the church is we go, okay, if an advisor came in and we explain the situation to them, an unbiased advisor, what would they say? And one of the moves is you just picture yourself walking into that room, hearing the situation, and oftentimes as you're explaining it to yourself, you realize that there's a right answer here. I just couldn't see it because I was so attached to both of the options. Hire yourself as an advisor.
And then don't overplay the God card. And I actually really do like this. I think we do this a lot. And I'm not trying to minimize those times and those decisions where it actually is very appropriate to play the God card. And when I say the God card, I mean God told me to go right and not left. Or I took that because that was God doing that. Because I do think sometimes it's, oh man, I moved to that city to take that job, and that was all God doing that, but then I wasn't good at that job and then got let go, and so that was all for the reason to bring me to this city to take that job, but then that was only to get me to this and this and this. And you know what? I don't want to downplay that. Maybe there's some truth there, but there's also, I think we overplay it because we're afraid of making decisions and taking ownership of them. So we can chalk it up to the big man upstairs, when really it's, no, I made that decision, and I wasn't as good as I thought I would be, but once again, God works through your choices, but God used it. And he turns all things to the good for those who love. And then God brought me here, and then I made that decision, and it was me and God. And it was the sovereignty of God and my responsibility as a decision maker who has been given free will. And so absolutely, I guess my heart in that is, you know, the boy who cried wolf, I think of the boy who cried God card. And you don't you don't need to overplay that, because there are those moments where it is incredible, because that is so God who is telling you to go left and not right. But so often I feel like he's, hey, I wanna design this with you. I wanna design it with you, and my sovereignty will work through your choices, and I will get you to where I'm trying to get you.
Which takes us to the storm stopper.
God's plan will work through my decision. God's plan, that, so much peace there. God's plan will work through my decision. I'm gonna scout it, I'm gonna make it, I'm gonna own it, I'm gonna do the best that I got, God. And at the end of the day, I lay my head on my pillow. Your plan will work through my decision, and his permission to sleep like a baby.
That's it. So here's your exercise, and we are dead serious. We want you to make 3 decisions this week. Make 3 decisions this week and give yourself a deadline for when you need to make those decisions. Hire yourself as an advisor if you need to. Don't overplay the God card in this. Scout the decision, make the decision, and by the time you're here next week, own.
And we're talking even like, hey, you got invited to that wedding, and it's out of town. You got invited to that party. And they circled back with you and were like, hey, did you? And you're like, oh, I'll get back to you, and I'll pray about it. You're like, you're not praying about it. You're not thinking about it. You're just waiting until it comes around again. And then it comes around again, and then it comes, those decisions, you make 3 of them, you'll be like, did I just spend a week at the spa? That's how your mind will feel. You just make 3 of those decisions, and it's like for your soul, the medicine it's looking for. Mm-hmm.
And to help you out a little bit, the answer probably rhymes with so.
And starts with N.
And ends with O. We'll do a whole session about that at some point. Scout the decision, guys.
Okay.
Make the decision and own the decision. All right.
Thank you so much for joining us for session 3. We will see you back here for session 4, which is all about integrity. And this session is called How to Take Better Naps.